that anymore. We're really concentrating on interaction for AR and VR. It's just a couple of images here of some of the outdoor work that we did starting in the mid to late 90s. Navigation with, back then, a very big bulky backpack, be able to track as we walked around with satellite tracking outside. Games, which is, of course, an incredibly important area for AR and VR. And one thing that I will spend a fair amount of time talking about today, and that's task assistance, using AR and VR to help people perform skilled tasks. So one way to think about what it is that we do, what's very important to us, is the notion of building and coming up with ways of building effective user interfaces. So the question that underlies a lot of the research that we do is asking how AR and VR can help people accomplish whatever goals they have, whether it's playing or working more effectively, whether they're doing it alone, together, indoors, or outdoors. In this talk, I'm going to concentrate on together, on having people work together courtesy of AR and VR user interfaces more effectively than they would without. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a particular domain that my lab has been working on for over a quarter century right now is task assistance. In particular, I'm going to concentrate on something we've worked on a bit more recently, and that's remote task assistance. So this is a concept that permeates a lot of what people do in many industries, in which you might have a local person, in the case what you're seeing here is a local technician. They're working on trying to fix something, maintain it, or assemble it. They might have a fair amount of skill, but they may encounter certain situations which are beyond what it is they know, beyond the documentation that might be available. And in that case, it is common in industry to have a SME, which is short for subject matter expert, who knows more than they do to assist them. And SMEs generally get to be SMEs, get to be experts by spending a fair amount of time, maybe starting like that technician who needs help. And over the years, and in some cases decades, they get better and better at what they do. They also get older and older, and they're less likely to want to go to a place that might be exciting for 20-something, and maybe they've been there before and they had a great time, but you know what, they want to be with their family or their kids or whatever. And so the idea of having that SME be remote is a very powerful one in industry. And in many cases, just a small amount of time may be needed to help. And sadly, in many cases, because of the lack of good technology, instead of being remote, they might have to fly somewhere and literally in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes understand why whatever it is wasn't working. So the question is, how can we use AR and VR to assist in this kind of task? So basically, the way we see it is there's two main goals that we're interested in looking at for the SME, the subject matter expert. One is helping the technician, the local person, get in place, get to the right position in orientation so they can perform a task. They can notice a problem, for example, or perform some intervention that might need them to be at a particular place, looking in a particular direction. The next thing is once they get there, we want to actually help them perform the task. You can think of this as being a combination of where and how. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the stuff that we've done to try to address the getting in place part. So this is some of the earlier work that we're looking at for multiple people working together. And what you're seeing on the screen here is a still image. This is from what a person wearing a video see-through display. So they're looking at the world through a pair of cameras. And they are seeing in front of them, helping parse what's going on here, a scale model of a turboprop aircraft engine. We actually have a full-scale engine in our lab. This is a small one. You can see that because there's a white hand to the right bottom of the slide, and that's being seen by our remote SME at full scale. So it's a tiny little model. It's actually positioned, tracking a little lazy Susan, a little spinning turntable that you can see, in fact, at the bottom over here. Okay, it's a physical spinning turntable. It lets the SME simply spin it around a way that they would not easily be able to spin real. Now, off on the left over here, this very simple abstract representation is basically a model, very abstract, of the head and the field of view of the technician. And what the SME sees is it's actually moving around. It represents where the technician is. And the SME is pointing to a couple of representations, or one of a set of representations of places they'd like to have that technician go to. And the idea is when they point to that location, the technician is going to be shown something that will get them to be in that location, get them to walk over to be where that thing is, given that they're actually in front of the real object itself. So what does that look like? Excuse me. Here we're seeing the view seen by the technician, and you can see off towards the left, this is actually the engine, physical engine itself. And this thing here, which looks a bit like a splayed picture frame window, is a representation of where we want to have that technician be. We want them to be looking through the window to be able to see something that the SME wants them to look at. Okay? So let me show you, now that I've given you a high-level explanation with some stills, let me show you what this looks like by actually running a bit what it looks like when this is being done. And so here we're seeing our SME from the outside. This is what the SME is seeing. This is one eye through their display. You can see all those little representations of possible places. You can see the SME's hand over there. And now I'm going to go and point to one of them. They've selected that. Now here's our technician wearing a video see-through display. They're walking to where the SME pointed. And how do they know how to do that? Well, what you can see over here is them walking over. There's a representation of that picture frame window. They're now looking through it. And now you can see the SME's hand pointing. There's like a long kind of a Pinocchio nose arrow there to make it easier for the SME to point without having to reach too far. And so the idea is that the technician can see what the SME is pointing to from a location, orientation, and position that makes sense for this particular test. Now I'm wondering, is there a way to get rid of these lights right in the front over here? Because I'm noticing that it looks very dark, very hard to see because of the lack of contrast. If there's some way to maybe turn the lights just to drive it down. Okay, so what I showed you is an early example of what we were trying to do. They had an interesting problem. So here there's this little picture frame window, and we're telling the technician to walk over and look through it. The problem is that different people interpret that differently. There's some people who will walk over to that picture frame window and they'll just like stick their head, right? There are other people who maybe they go to museums a lot and it looks like a frame on a painting, and they know if you get that close to a painting, the guard's going to yell at you. And so if the frame is over here, they'll stand around like this and they'll look through it and say, I'm looking through it. And that fact that it's just ambiguous as to what it is that we want you to do, that is confusing. So you could say, well, why don't we simply give you kind of a representation of what we do in computer graphics of a position, that's the center of projection, and an outline essentially of the graphics cluster. The problem with that is that that is very specific. It shows you a very particular place and a very particular direction to look. And there are many tasks in which you don't have to be at a particular position and looking in a particular direction. What I'm doing right now is an example of that. I can be standing over here. I guess that makes it a little louder. I can be standing further back. I can be looking this way. I can be looking that way. Those all make sense. On the other hand, this probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Like I'm facing backwards to you. So there's some things that work and some things that don't work. What we're interested in doing for many tasks in which there's a range of positions and a range of orientations is finding a way to present that to people visually, get them to very quickly assume one of the legal positions and legal orientations. So let me give you an idea of what that looks like. This is a view of what we call a parafrustum. And this, in fact, is a visualization of this particular thing that we've worked on. It looks a bit like a car airbag in the process of being deployed. That big yellow ellipsoid is actually a target. You want to have your head, in fact, both of your eyes, inside of that yellow ellipsoid. If it's really big, there's a wide set of positions you could be in. If it's very small, there's a more constrained, smaller set that you can be in. So that turns out to be what we call our head volume. And there is also what's called a tail volume. You can see that at the bottom of the screen. It's still a little hard to see right now because the room isn't that dark and the projector not that bright, but there's a very faint red outline that you would normally see if you were in the head-mounted display. And that basically is what we call the tail volume. I'll explain how that works in a couple of seconds. And then we basically take these two ellipsoids and we wrap them in a convex hull, and those ribs that you're seeing over here are basically in the hull that is wrapping these things. So here's the deal. Let me show you a set of stills, and I'll show you a little video of what this looks like. What you're seeing up over here is a view of what our technician might actually see. And they know this is the target, they need to get their head in there. People are very good at walking over and getting their head into that target. So here we're getting a little bit closer. Head is not quite in there. At this point over here, our head is actually in, and when your head gets in that ellipsoidal target, you'll see it, as you'll see when I show you the video. The yellow goes away, and these ribs basically disappear very quickly, and then everything is fine, provided that the very thin red ellipsoid outline is within your field of view. It actually has to be within the intersection of the two eyes field of view in the case of stereo, which is actually what we're doing here. If instead of stopping when you're where you should be, you stick your head even further through, then that red ellipsoid gets really angry looking, the ribs come back in again. And here we're seeing it get even angrier looking. We're really intentionally trying to show what it looks like when you're doing it wrong. And in fact, if it cuts, if that ellipsoid cuts on just the left side, but not the right side, or just the top side, and not the bottom side, we put in an extra little white bar around the side to indicate you need to get away from it. So this is basically a heuristic to try and maximize the amount of that ellipsoid you see. If it's cut off from the left and right, well, if you're in a good position, then you can't make the orientation any better. If it's cut off from the top and bottom, then that's also going to be okay. Ideally, it would be cut off on the top and bottom, or cut off from the left and right, or wholly inside. It can't be cut on one of those pairs of sides. And then what you're seeing on the right over here is what it looks like in one position in orientation, from which that red ellipsoid is now fully seen, your head's in the right place, and you're looking in one of the right angles. So let me actually show you what this looks like. So there's a little video running here. This is one eye of the stereo display. We're getting closer and closer. We're inside. You can see the yellow haze. When the yellow haze goes away, we're fine, but now we're going to make it bad. Really, really bad. We're sticking our head through. We're cutting on one of the sides, cutting on the top, and these are all examples of cutting on one of those sides. We'll pull back a bit. Ribs go away. This is good. All these views you're seeing over here, these are all good for whatever that particular task is, and then we'll back our head out of that. And so depending upon the task, the idea would be that we have different size head ellipsoids, different size tail ellipsoids, different shape, and different orientation, which would represent the good places to be for the particular task it is that you have at hand, to avoid having to cut you down, to restrict you to only one position, only one orientation, which for many tasks is really overkill. So that's just a little bit of some of the stuff that we've done on trying to get you in the right place. And all the things I've talked about and we'll talk about have user studies associated with them. In the interest of time, and because, to be honest, they're less fun to talk about, I'll talk really about the stuff that we've done and less about the studies. If you're interested, I'm happy to talk with you about the studies we've done afterwards. So now let's look at the actual performing the task part. And so I'm going to show you basically some images and videos from a demo that we brought to the SIGGRAPH conference last year. And here we have what you're seeing on the left is a view of our local technician in augmented reality. On the right is a view of our remote SME in virtual reality. And to make the demo make sense and be easier to actually put on, these people were really not remote from each other. They were in a single largish booth with a curtain in between them, so they couldn't see each other directly, but it made it possible for us to have all of our equipment in one place. But we really were acting like they were actually remote, with the assumption that they can still talk with each other because, of course, voice over IP telephony works quite nicely. We're assuming that they have verbal communication, but being able to actually interact in 3D was going to be important for a task like the one that you're about to see. So what's going on over here? This is our task domain. And so here we have our remote SME, who needs to show the local technician, this is the technician's view, how to install gears in correct locations. And this is a physical chassis. It has a bunch of axles on it. There are two gears you're seeing off on the right. The chassis and the gears are all being tracked in 6 degrees of freedom. People who have some of this technology would recognize this as a optical motion capture system of the sort that is typically used in movie making. And it basically lets a bunch of cameras aimed towards the volume in which people are working be able to go and track at a pretty high frame rate the position and orientation of rigid clusters of these retroreflective spheres that are reflecting IR back to the cameras. And so you in fact can see, this is just the top part of the headroom display. This image is actually shot right above the head of the technician. And you can see the top part of the headroom display. There's some of those little retroreflective spheres that are on it, and those are being used basically to track the position and orientation of the headroom display. And you can see some more. There's one over here, for example, one over there. These was dying. One over there. And they're being used to actually track the position and orientation of the chassis. And that means that the technician can pick up the chassis, they can hold it in the right way, whatever makes sense to them, and they can then pick the gears up and just move them relative to the chassis to put them on. But the point is, in this case, we assume they know how to put a gear on an axle, but they don't know which gear in which axle. Okay, so here is our remote subject matter expert. All the items, as I mentioned, in the technician's world are being tracked in 3D, position and orientation, and our technician is performing, I'm sorry, it's the stellar technician, is performing the task in AR, and they're using, in this case, a stereoscopic, relatively wide field optical see-through display made by a company called Meta. And here is our remote SME. They are in VR, using controllers. These are Rift controllers attached, being used with, in fact, an Oculus Rift. And because we're tracking all of those items in the technician's environment, and because we actually have CAD models of all of them, we can create what often is called a digital twin of that environment for our remote SME. So our remote SME is actually seeing a virtual copy of the environment of the technician. So, what's going on over here? This is a view through one eye of our SME. As I said, there's a virtual copy, and we use the term in our work virtual proxy for the copies of each item that are positioned and oriented exactly the way that they are in the technician's world. So that is what our SME is seeing over here. Now, what we'd like our SME to do is not just talk about these things and say, hey, you know that gear kind of on your right, a little bit at the bottom. I want you to pick it up and move it to the second axle from the top a little bit into the left. We don't want them to have to do that. We want them to demonstrate. And so we want them to be able to reach out, grab hold of a gear, for example, and then show them what to do. Except if they reached out and grabbed hold of that gear over there, which is being tracked in the world of the technician, then it would not be in the same place the technician was seeing it. It would be confusing. So what we do is when the SME reaches out to grab something, we make what we call a virtual replica of it, which is controlled only by the SME, unlike the virtual proxy that's controlled only by the technician. And now the SME can control that replica, can move it around, can place it in the right place, and our technician also gets to see it. Now, to make things even more complicated, this is a demo being done at a conference. We were not demonstrating it ourselves. We wanted to have people walk up to it who've never seen it before and use it. We wanted them not to take a lot of time because we had promised SIGGRAPH that we would take under 5 minutes to actually run a person through the demo. Some of these people had never had a head-worn display on their head before. And so there's going to be time putting it on and off. And now we've got someone who has to be an expert, but they're not an expert. And so to make them an expert, what they've been told is when they pick up one of those gears, they're going to see this red rubber band line that will go from the gear to the axle it's supposed to be on. So they then proceed to show, by putting the virtual gear on that axle, what it is that's supposed to be done. And then when the technician tries to do it, because they've done the right thing themselves, they can then say to the technician, yes, you've done it right, or no, that's the wrong axle, etc. So we're trying to make them into kind of like a pseudo-expert for the sake of being able to go and have 2 people in our demo who are not us, rather than having one of us be the ringer who's actually playing the role of the expert. Okay, so that's why you're seeing this instruction, which normally a real expert would lead, of course, because they're an expert. So let me show you what this looks like from the standpoint of our technician. So this is a view shot through the head-worn display. I'm shooting through an RGB camera that's actually in the head-worn display, and it's showing you essentially a merged version, which you're going to see materialize in a couple of seconds, and the real stuff, all of what you're seeing right now. So here's what happens. So that moving gear was moved by the SME. That yellow line tells the technician what to do. The technician is now going to put the gear on the axle. Now our SME is going to go and show them another one. So they pick up another gear. They put it on the one that they know is supposed to go on. And our technician puts it on that axle too. And at this point, the SME would be saying, really good job. But here we just see that they just pick them off again. You can still see those rubber band lines connecting them, so you can avoid the confusion that you might have, since the gears might look very much alike, especially if you're not an expert. They actually are a little bit different. Okay? And so the point is that by adding this amount of augmentation to the view of the technician, they are then seeing this assistance in the actual context of the task domain itself. Instead of seeing instructions off on the side, on a piece of paper, on a separate monitor, they're seeing it embedded in the actual task context itself. Okay, let's go back now to our SME. Here's our SME's view in VR. Before I actually show you the video of this, I want to make an important point for us, and that's that all the SME needs is the head-worn display, the computer driving it, and of course the data, the models of the things that it is that they're interacting with. Now, what we didn't want was to have the SME actually have to have real gears or real chassis, etc. And the reason we didn't want that is we're thinking in terms of the SME who has now spent maybe decades working for the company and is really thinking about retiring, saying to the boss, hey, you know, I think I'm going to retire next month. And then some companies will say, well, you know, we really would love you to keep on working. What if we gave you a raise? And the answer might be, well, you know, like I want to play with my grandkids. How much is the raise? 10%, no. 50%, no. There are people who say no to double or even triple. They just want out. Now, on the other hand, often when people retire, they end up realizing that maybe they kind of had a purpose in life and suddenly they're playing golf and maybe they're not enjoying it that much. And so the idea that someone might want to still keep contact with the people that they worked with before, still feel the value of being able to go and, you know, actually know more than other people did, let alone some young whippersnapper that you're helping, but not have to go into work is really important. So the idea was maybe a company could say to someone, what if you didn't have to go into work? You could work from home, work whenever you want to, just give us a little bit of advance notice. We'll pay you, of course, right? You know, you'll have to have good computer and a good head-worn display. We'll buy that for you. Your grandkids can play with it when you're not using it. There's a certain point at which probably someone will say, you know what, sure, sign me up. I can always say no later. Okay? So we don't want to have to, if you're working from home, you don't want to have a bunch of greasy gears and stuff, right? Just that nice head-worn display that your 12-year-old grandson wants to play with, or granddaughter wants to play with. So here's what our SME sees. So they're going to go out, they're going to reach out, and they're going to make, okay, a replica. And now they're going to put the replica on the axle. And by the way, when they put it on the axle, it automatically goes on the right way because they know how to do it. The technician knows how to do it. The point is which gear, which axle. So we want to make this as fast as possible. It's the second one. They get it close enough, let go, it spins into place. And that other one is now being controlled by the technician, who's working, in fact, in a little bit in parallelism with what they're doing over there. And we're done over there. Okay. So what I want to do is to actually move on to some other collaborative stuff we're doing. And so I'm showing you a picture over here. Does anyone know what this is? What are we looking at?
New York?
It looks like New York, right? It looks like Manhattan. Well, this is not really Manhattan, okay? What you're looking at is a model, the world's largest, to this day, it was built in 1960, early 60s, to this day is the world's largest physical model of a city. It is nearly 100 feet on a side. It lives in what is currently the Queens Museum in Queens. Used to be the New York City Pavilion at the World's Fair. It was built nominally to impress people coming to the 1964 fair with how amazing New York was. But another reason they built it is after the fair, they wanted to use it for urban planning so that people could walk around in it, you know, and point at stuff and say, let's put the bridge over there. Let's put a big skyscraper over here and do it in context of this really incredibly tangible, big model. Okay, this is really, really big. Okay? And of course, what they needed to do is they wanted to keep it updated. When they built it, every building in this entire city of New York is actually represented. So this is not fanciful. It really was supposed to model geometrically what the city was like. And of course, keeping that up to date is insane. So one thing we've been interested in is, can we do something like this virtually? And so you're seeing essentially a view now of a virtual representation of something like this that is running on the same equipment that a 12-year-old who's into VR would have gotten their parents to buy them for the holiday season. And if they hadn't already, would be buying this holiday season. We're using models built by companies that make these available at a variety of different levels of cost. We're using the free versions, in fact, of all these things. And unlike what we saw before, that physical model, we're now adding to the physical infrastructure virtual stuff. In this case, you're looking at some records representing 311 calls. 311 is the number that you call in New York and any other U.S. cities if there's something that you're going to complain about to the government that isn't an emergency. The police don't really need to come for anything. There's a pothole. There's someone making some noise. You just saw a really big rat. You know, these are the things that you report to 311. There we go. These are the things you report to 311. So what you're seeing here is a still of a VR system. This is a collaborative system. You're seeing another person over there in the distance. This is what it looks like running in VR. You point with your controller, and when you point, you basically see a bunch of these records. We're going out live to different data sources that actually have these records in them. Those are tweets off on the side coming up, all of which are also geotagged. You can scroll through the stuff on one of these things, look at it, bring it a little bit closer to be able to see it better. And the idea is multiple people grabbing hold of these and looking at them might be able to go, for example, try to explore certain things. Like maybe you have some tweets that are talking about being upset about noise. Maybe you're seeing some 311 complaints about a lot of noise. And maybe you're looking at a Yelp record, we have Yelp in here as well, for, let's say, a restaurant that just opened and that's proudly talking about all the bands they have playing there. So maybe, you know, those things belong together and you might want to, finding out about them, do something about them. So this could be something that would be used by people doing planning, urban design, enforcing various kinds of laws, first responders, all the way down because of the inexpense, the lack of expense of the equipment. This could even be used by people who are trying to figure out where their next apartment's going to be, trying to explore, you know, what a part of the city might look like, their same city or a different city. Now, I just showed you this running in VR. I'm going to now show you this running in AR. This is with video see-through AR. We're looking through a pair of cameras. And what you're seeing here is a panel. It's actually a little bulletin board in which you can make copies of these records. That bulletin board is synchronized with and shared with another user who's in the world with you. You'll see them shortly when they start the video going here. And the idea is you can work together with them to make these inferences, for example, about the data that you're seeing collaboratively rather than just by yourself. So let's see what this looks like. So now again, we're looking through. This is a Vive Pro using its stereo video. And here's our collaborator off on the side over there. You see we're getting tweets and 311 calls. You can grab a hold of something. And now we're actually going to plaster it on that board over there. And then things on the board can be moved around to be able to go and cluster them in ways that might make sense. So this is a very beginning of a technology demonstration of how you could use this kind of technology to be able to explore data that might make a lot more sense when seen in context of the physical infrastructure of the city than it would simply being looked at in spreadsheets, the way that people normally look at this, or being seen on top of a map, for example, that doesn't show you the full 3D that you can walk around. Now, what I want to do is to show you one more piece of work that we're doing. And now we're looking at using collaboration for motor rehabilitation. So what we're looking at is working with folks who are therapists, working with patients who have certain kinds of motor coordination problems. They can't coordinate their left and right sides of their body all that well. And in order to be able to come up with something that would work well for an intervention, we're looking at ways of making something that would be really, really fun to play and also collaborative. So it wouldn't just be someone playing with themselves, but someone playing with a therapist, where, as we'll see shortly, the thing we want to do requires very, very close coupling between the multiple machines that you might have if people were not in the same location. So we want to support two people working together who are not co-located, who are remote from each other. And that means networking. And right now, if you had something in which you network, let's say 2 people, and you did it over 4G, for example, you're looking at tens of milliseconds worth of latency. And in the demo I'm going to show you over here, this does not work well with tens of milliseconds worth of latency. So what's going on? What you're seeing here are your view, you're one of 2 people, and you see your hands over here. These are mapped to controllers that you're holding. This is a VR application being run in this case on Oculus Rifts. Your hands are holding 2 handles, these brownish looking things. The handles are connected to virtual ropes. The virtual ropes are connected to the 4 corners of this virtual marble platform. There's a virtual ball that you roll on. So the model basically is 2 people who are facing each other, except the fact they're not really in the same place. They're in very different places. They're virtually facing each other, and they're controlling this platform that a ball's rolling on. And so the point is, what we'd like to do is to have them keep the ball from rolling off. And in fact, once you get good at keeping the ball from rolling off, we want you to be able to bounce the ball up in the air. And the problem is that any of these things, if you've got 30 or 40 milliseconds worth of latency, delay between the machines, and you have one person say, for example, 3, 2, 1, bounce, you're both supposed to bounce it up, the word bounce, and one person, the person counting, bounces on the word bounce, and the other person, when they hear bounce and see bounce, 40 milliseconds later, they pull up on their end. Instead of it going up like this, it's going to go up like that, and the ball will go off somewhere that they'll never see it again. In that case, another ball will come down again. But the point is, it does not work well. And actually, what I'm going to show you in a second, when you run this at 15 milliseconds or more of delay, it's awful. And you get mad at the system because you know it's not your fault. It has to be below that for it to work. And so the thing I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you running on Ethernet, but we actually have run this with an experimental pre-commercial version of 5G, well under 10 milliseconds of delay downtown in New York. And we, in fact, took this as a demo to something called Mobile World Congress Americas in LA, running on early commercial 5G as guests of Verizon. So I'll show you what this looks like. And so here, basically, we're bouncing the ball up. And this is not super hard to do, but the first time you actually pick this up and try to do this, you're not going to be able to do it that well. At least everyone that we have had in our lab has not been able to do it that well at the beginning. There's a wide range. There's some people who are pretty impressively good the first time they try it, and others who just never get the knack of it. Right? But the great thing is that when people try it with appropriately low latency, the feedback that we get is, oh darn, I have to be a little faster. It really is the sense of it's your fault. It's not the fault of the system. Once you get 15 milliseconds and beyond, it is the fault of the system. So here we're actually trying to see what we can do that would show off the advantages of really, really low latency in terms of being able to feel this peppy responsiveness between 2 people controlling the same thing. This is not like a ball game where I throw you a ball and then you throw it back to me. Once I let go of the ball, there's a lot of latency that can creep in there and you'd never really notice it. These are two people controlling the one level of indirection. The handles are connected to those ropes, a shared virtual platform. And there's some interesting things that I'm not going to have time to talk about in terms of how we actually structured the application. So speaking of how we structured the application, what I want to do is just finish up right now, review what I've talked about, several different systems that we've built that support this notion of being able to go and have multiple people, whether they're remote from each other, as in the example on the left, or co-located, like the example in the middle, or again, potentially remote, like the example on the right, interact effectively with each other. One more thing I want to mention is that all of the stuff that I just showed you was actually built using a system called Mercury messaging, which we have open source. I'm giving you the URL to be able to get it over here. And this basically is designed for use in Unity. It's a general concept, but we have a reference implementation that runs in Unity. And what it does basically is it allows you to communicate between different parts of the scene graph very easily, not just up and down ancestors and descendants, but between arbitrary parts of the scene graph, which of course you can already do in Unity, but we do it without requiring that you make custom code. We have essentially a networking facility that lets you build networks that use different parts of the scene graph, that let you specify standard things that happen when a message gets sent from one place to another. And in fact, this works not only in a single scene graph on one machine, it also works across multiple scene graphs on multiple machines. We handle all the networking to make that possible, and we do it in a way that's actually more efficient, better in many ways than what you would do yourself if you were actually implementing this stuff from scratch. So, having mentioned that at this point, I think I've come to the end of my talk. I want to acknowledge the students and colleagues, funding agencies that were responsible for the stuff that I just showed you. Our URL for Mercury is up at the top over there. I encourage you to download it and actually try using it. And I hope I have a little time left for questions. Yes?
The SME demo, the guy was placing the gear specific axle, right?
Yes.
But there are like 3 or 4 possible axles.
On that one, we had, I think, something on the order of 4 possible axles that each gear could go on.
And what was the level of precision that you could achieve?
Okay. So in that task, we're assuming the technician and the expert are both really good at putting gears on axles. And in fact, at the demo, that gear has a square cross-section hole. The axle is square, because otherwise if it was round, you'd have to then use a little screw to tighten it or something. And a number of the demoees, who are just people who are walking up, really we had to spend a little extra care explaining to them how to put, a square peg in a square hole, so to speak. Again, it's one of those things where there's an interesting variation, a range of what people know and don't know. But we assumed that the only issue for the SME and the tech was which gear goes on which axle. And so because we don't want to have the poor SME have to put a virtual gear with no force feedback on a virtual axis and line up the square hole with the square axle, which could take even longer in virtually than it would take doing physically. Even if it was physical, it's not how to put it on an axle, it's which gear on which axle. So what you were seeing there, and I pointed out, but I didn't stop the video, is when the gear got close enough to one of the axles and the SME let go of it, then the gear would automatically go on the axle correctly. And the idea is that, of course, the technician knows there's no human being could do that fast, but that's not the point. They know how to put a gear in an axle. It's please, which gear do I put on which axle in which order? And that was what the SME was really showing. Okay. No? Yes.
Steve, talking about visualization in a city. I don't know if you have any experience, but in the project that I'm working, I want to put a 3D model in a park, in a special place in the park.
Yes.
And I want somebody else to see it later. But how do you align the model and for the people to see it in that exact place? Because right now I was trying with GPS, but
Yes.
you know GPS is very
Okay, so there's basically two answers to the question. One of them is the easy current answer, which is if you have something in the park that would be recognizable, unique enough that a system using a camera will be able to recognize the view of that thing, which is something that we're getting to be able to do with some of the things like ARKit and AR4 that are coming out. Then you could indeed do things of that sort, or things like, for example, Euphoria from now PTC, formerly Qualcomm. That's one approach. Now there's another one, and that's that starting in the late 90s, my lab was using a kind of satellite tracking. GPS is the US constellation, GNSS is the politically correct way of talking about them all without playing favorites. So we were using something called real-time kinematic GNSS, which back in the late 90s was really expensive. And right now that's become cheaper and cheaper. And that kind of GNSS requires that you have a base station and you run it yourself, you run our own, or you basically pay somebody else a monthly fee for using their base station.
Okay.
And real-time kinematic GNSS, when you're close enough to the base station and you see enough satellites, can get you down to around 10 hertz to under an inch in terms of accuracy, which for putting something in the park is probably fine. This has become a lot cheaper now because not only has technology gotten better, but that's not enough. It's not just that technology has to get better, there has to be a demand. It turns out that there's a lot of people who have things that cost a fair amount of money that move around really quickly, and that they don't want to know where they are within a matter of a couple of yards. They really need much better knowledge of where those things that move around really quickly are. And of course, I'm talking about drones. You know, if you're not going to have line of sight of your drone, bad things could happen if you try to fly through something that the drone, of course, could go through, but now it's 6 feet over relative to where it should be, and bye-bye drone. Right? So you actually can now get a full system with a base station and what we call a rover for a GNSS system for under $2,000. That when you set up your base station will be accurate when you see enough satellites come to around the inch.
Just want to say, hope that keeping now on schedule. And I would like to thank again Steve and you.
Next conference or next deep sector it is a friend of Infinity and personally too. We did the last year some summer course of visual analytics here, and it's from the original. His origin is from Autumn team, and in the last 5 years, Dirk is part of the Leipzig team of medical magic medical analytics. Something, but you will correct me, it's my simplification. And we are very happy to have the visit of Dirk once more, and we are working very hard to make a lot of things for the next future.
So, welcome to my presentation. It will not be about virtual or artificial reality, not even so much about information visualization, but about a very specific topic in graph drawing, not really. And I will tell you why graph drawing alone will not help if you try to help higher informations. But first of all, I'm from Leipzig University, and the group is called Signal and Image Processing. Professor Sherman is doing a lot of scientific visualization, including medical applications. And I'm mostly cooperating these days with the bioinformaticians. That doesn't mean that these things don't have medical applications, but it's on a more fundamental, on a molecular level. So, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about this problem, which doesn't seem to be a problem. It's a nice drawing, and in fact, you can always draw it nicely like I did here. But I will show you in a moment examples where you cannot achieve these nice drawings. What you have is a sequence, and for our purposes, I don't want to go into the bioinformatics too much. You can ask me about the details later if you want to. But just assume that you have 4 different letters, and you know in which sequence these letters appear. This is what you see essentially here down here. You have one letter, the next, and so on. And there is some pairings. You are allowed to pair some of them. And we have a bioinformatics package, which is maintained by our collaborators from Vienna. It's called the Vienna RNA package, which essentially gives us the theoretical underlying RNA. And this is because it's a 2D structure. It's called secondary structure. The The primary structure would be the sequence alone, without these additional couplings here. And the tertiary structure is what you really have. You don't have these things planar, you have them in 3D. And this is the cause why a straightforward approach to drawing these structures in 2D doesn't really work. For our purposes, we need the things I noted here. We have several types of structures. This part here is called the exterior loop. It seems to be a straight line. You can also draw it in a circular fashion if you want to, but we prefer to draw it in a straight line. And it's open-ended. And you have a definite starting point, which is here to the left, and an ending point, which is here to the right. The next one is these hairpin loops. These hairpin loops only have one connection to the so-called stems, the sequences of the pairs of the nucleotides. And those are the interesting things for the bioinformaticians because there all the action happens, or most of the action happens. Other loops that we have to take care of are so-called internal loops connected to exactly 2 stems, multi-loops, 3 or more stems, and then we have these bulge loops, which are also loops, but only interrupting such a stem on one side. And for some applications in bioinformatics, it's useful to not draw them as loops, but as these spikes coming out from the stems. So this is a simple, nice example. And then my colleague convinced me to show you the ugly side. This is a very much larger example, and it has several problems. First of all, here you have an intersection. Intersections is something you don't want to have in graph drawing in general, and you don't want to have it in drawing 2D RNA secondary structures at all. The second thing, and I don't know if I find one of these at once, but some of these form these hand-like structures. Here, you find these hand-like structures, but sometimes these spikes are not really stems with additional loops, but they are part of the loop from which they emerge. But you cannot distinguish them from stems that come from these loops. You want more overlaps? Yeah, I can show you. This is a different tool producing this kind of output. I have some more. Where you find suddenly these loops inside other loops, which you don't want to have at all, and a lot of intersections again. You can have deformations, like you don't recognize the loops or the stems anymore because due to using a force-directed layout, everything is distorted, I would say. And you have a pretty nice representation, which also can be pseudo-knots, which we can currently not. But we could show that this will not always give outer-planar solutions. We can construct examples where this one fails too and gives intersections. So what is the problem? The problem is not drawing this in an outer-planar way. This is easy. Everyone can do it. But we want to do it while respecting the constraints that the bioinformaticians have, because they want to infer structure, they want to infer information from the structure. So we did a couple of constraints, all of them taken from the literature, and sometimes we had to choose, like the first one, okay, drawing at a specific point. We always start lower left. The exterior nucleotides, the exterior loop should be a straight line. Others prefer to have it in a circular structure drawn, but we decided for a straight line because it's easier to find and recognize. If I have this stem-like structure, so pairs, additional pairs, that form this type of ladder, then it should be perpendicular to the exterior loop, upwards only. This makes it also easier to find the sequence of nucleotides. And now come the constraints that make work hard. First of all, the distance between two nucleotides in the sequence, exterior nucleotides in the sequence, should be constant. And we will refer to this distance as backbone distance because the sequence is called the backbone. The same holds for neighboring nucleotides of a stem. And we want also to have a constant distance between two nucleotides in such a loop. Whether it's a multi-loop, a material loop, or happy loop, doesn't matter. And in fact, also for the bulge loop, this distance is the same as this one. However, the base pair distance, the distance between those pairs, can be different from the backbone distance. But it should be constant throughout the drawing. Some aesthetical criteria are that stems should be drawn as rectangles, loops should be drawn as circles, the whole drawing should be as compact as possible. And finally, our decision was to let bulges not change stem direction. And in fact, this drawing respects all these constraints. And it's easy to build an algorithm to do this. Our algorithm is called RNA Turtle. We need it anyway as a pre-processing step for our complete algorithm. And it simulates turtle graphics. Turtle graphics says the following. I have something called turtle that moves over the screen, and then tell it, move a straight line, or change your angle, and then move a straight line again. So the turtle starts at a defined position, moves one step, okay, no change, one step, no change, until it reaches the first stem, then it changes to the direction up, moves until it reaches the loop, goes one step, one step, one step, one step, and this until it ends here. There is one catch though. Walking a fixed distance as long as I'm on the backbone is easy. Computing the angles is also fairly easy. The problem is of computing the radius of the loops. Because as soon as I have two different distances for elements on the loop, which are equivalent to two different angles that I need to consider, I cannot find an algebraic solution of the problem. So I need an approximation, and in this case we use the Newton-Raphson approximation to calculate the radius. While the turtle is walking in straight lines, it's only fixing the positions, and afterwards, for all the stems in the exterior loop, we draw lines, and for the loops, we draw arcs. And as I said, it works fine. Yeah, there is examples where this leads to drawings like these, where I have a lot of intersections and overlap, which makes the analysis of these drawings difficult. And of course, if you remember that we have a tertiary structure, which is in 3 dimensions, then you can understand why there is these overlaps. The overlaps are only due to the 2D projection, but not really if you put this in 3D space. So what can we do? What we can do is to replace some of the constraints by constraints that allow planar and especially an outer planar drawing. So our goal is to achieve point number 12 prime, an outer planar drawing, while lifting two constraints, like the constant distance between two neighboring exterior nucleotides. If we have two stems attached to the exterior, then we want this distance only to be constant between these two stems. So we can move stems apart as much as we need. And the other thing that we need to allow is to change the distances between nucleotides in the loop. Finally, it could happen, even though we lift these two constraints, that in the final drawing, we don't have really an overlap, but two nucleotides are really close to each other. And being really close to each other means that we cannot really distinguish if there is a connection or if they are really distant. They can become, they can get arbitrarily near to each other. So we have an additional constraint that we want to have a minimum distance between any pair of bases, especially two wild situation slices. So on the left-hand side, you see again RNA turtle, and on the right-hand side, you see the result if we use the drawing algorithm for the outer planar drawings, RNA puzzler. So how do we get from left to right? First of all, we simplify the complete structure. We have faces, and we know that each of these faces here is enabled to this outer face, because we can create an outer planar drawing. And like this, we can create a node for each face, starting with the face, the outside face, and then going one face to the next face. And then here in the loop, we have to split path. What we get in the end is a tree. Tree starting at the exterior face, and the leaves, as you can see, the leaves are the happy leaves. This structure is way too fine because there is a lot of nodes that we don't really know, because we know that this whole block should be drawn as a rectangle. So what we do is to simplify, and in fact we throw away all the faces of the stems, because we can associate each of these stems to the next loop. There can be only one stem attached to the next loop due to the tree structure. And then we have a tree that only has as nodes the loops, and finally we can represent each of these nodes by either circles, the exterior loop by this rectangle, and the stems also by adequate rectangles. Which problems do we have to solve? There can be essentially two types of intersections. The first type is the so-called ancestor intersection. If I start at the exterior and follow the path, then I can come to a node that intersects a previous node in the tree. This we want to resolve by extending the distance between the nucleotides down here, and in the same moment changing the angle between this part and this part so that it becomes larger, and then just remove this part out of the blue node. So the red node will be moved away from the blue node by changing the angle at the one with the green node with the orange arrow. The other intersection that can occur is a so-called sibling intersection that is between two child trees of my current violet node. So this red one, that part, and this blue nodes with this green area, they overlap by an angle gamma. And if I move them away from each other, again by changing this violet node, the radius and the angle, I can resolve this intersection. What we were struggling a long time with was that we wanted to keep the complete drawing as compact as possible. So whenever it was possible, we were reducing the radius and we were changing angles back. But this situation was not stable. We got a situation where we had an intersection left, and we increased the radius and the angle, and then we had an intersection to the right. We decreased the radius and the angle, and it didn't work. And only when we started only to allow increases of the radius, then we could avoid these situations. And we can show that if we allow only increases in radius, then we finally will get an intersection-free representation. And to show you a really large example, this time the RNA found in a gorilla. It's intersection-free, all the stems with the respective child trees point upwards. We see some of these loops get really large, but that's the price to pay for the outer drawing. And what is also very important, if we take a similar RNA sequence, which you find in Homo sapiens, then you can easily compare these two, because the rules for drawing them are very similar, and so the results also are pretty similar. For example, you see here are two outgoing sequences that are quite similar. So, when do bioinformaticians accept such a solution? And all these other solutions were mostly produced by people working in the area of bioinformatics and visualizing data from bioinformaticians. So one point is this drawing algorithm is not allowed to spend a lot of time. So the rule of thumb that we got was that constructing the folding, which means finding where do we have these pairs of bases, should not be much shorter than drawing the result. And in fact, we were able to optimize the whole drawing procedure such that we are really faster. So the folding bioinformatician part takes longer than the drawing part. And then these solutions can get accepted by the application. We have an e-preprint of the complete solution available. The print should be out soon. The final typesetting is on its way. And we are quite happy about the results because, as far as we know, it's really the first solution in this area that is available, where the complete algorithm is open source. you can check the algorithm, and you can really get a complete intersection-free drawing for a problem that is already around, yeah, for quite some time. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
How much training the person needs to understand this type of graphs?
The point is, they want to have drawings like this. That's why I cannot use a standard graph drawing algorithm, which also creates autopilot drawings, throw it on the problem, and give it to the bioinformatician, because he will be very, very, very unhappy with the result. There is a couple of slides from Visby from some time, from one of the French researchers who were also trying to come up with some drawing algorithms. And he has made a nice cartoon, so I'm the computer scientist, I can do a good drawing, and this computer scientist was not respecting the conventions in the area. Because people grew RNAs since decades. They needed these drawings to understand what is happening, but these were hand-drawn. And the best available tools until now were tools that allowed to manually change automatic drawings in a way such that the bioinformaticians could interpret them. And this is a sort of compromise. We had to relax some of the constraints. Yeah? For example, here's an area where you only have 2 nucleotides and you have a really large distance. This is something bioinformaticians don't like. But the compromise is between relaxing these constraints and really having an overlap-free and intersection-free display that you can analyze. Because as soon as you get interactions, you have another problem. So we had to make a choice. And what is very important to also is that these are consistent. That if I do an automatic drawing of such an RNA, it will be the same over and over again. If I have a similar structure, I should give it a similar drawing so that the people in the application area can compare. And by the way, talking about a large amount of data, we pulled the complete available database at this time of RNAs known, they are collected, and run our algorithm on all of them. And we are proud to say they produce planar drawings for all of them. This was our stress test. We really wanted to have something that works for all of them. And we are testing if it's intersection-free at the end. So it's not said that if you find a new one, you could make a point against the algorithm, but according to what we know and what we could motivate, I don't want to say proof, but if we can motivate, it should work for any of these sequences. Further questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. These 2 excellent conference. We will take a brief coffee break. 15 minutes. We interrogate here to the Professor Adler presentation.
For all the speakers, if you don't mind, we can go out and take a picture.
Please. Thank you.